Thursday, July 23. Well, all this coronavirus stuff goes on, doesn't it? You are writing to me in droves, all saying the same thing. Stop talking about the number of people who test positive. Tell us how many you've tested. What percentage have tested positive? How many cases are critical? What are the ages of these people? What pre-existing conditions do the people have who've been admitted to hospital? How many cases are mild? How many have recovered? We're sick of the headlines. A registered nurse for over 30 years has written to me to say in desperation this is government terrorism, medical terrorism and media terrorism. They're genuinely and legitimately worried. Victorians are being told they could face restrictions until Christmas, as the Andrews government can't differentiate between those who test positive and those who are at risk. Now, if no one else makes the point, I have to. Peter Dunn tested positive. A few months ago, a young bloke who works for me tested positive. You're not about to dive into a coffin if you test positive. And yet here we are, not 6 months on, being told we've got to climb an economic mountain. We didn't create the mountain. This was created by politicians and bureaucrats who have not forfeited a cent. And now the Federal Treasurer tells us we're facing a set of eye-watering figures. Eye-watering indeed. A budget deficit of about $300 billion, gross debt heading to $1 trillion. It's enough to make you vomit. Tony Abbott made the point as to what should have underpinned all of our responses to the coronavirus crisis, namely the extent to which saving lives should or should not take precedence over preserving the economy. Who's worried about the young people, 15 to 24? The Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe rightly says that young people have disproportionately borne the job losses and associated mental health pressures. What is the cost of that to the nation? Young people are heavily represented in things like hospitality, recreation, retail and the arts, while in no way minimising the loss of employment that has occurred across all age groups. For younger Australians, the crisis comes when they're transitioning from study to work. They've got no on-the-job experience. They most probably have HECS debt. They may well be paying rent. The prospects of ever owning a home are non-existent, and financial pressures cause mental health issues. So does social isolation. Then we're told the pressure on the banks will intensify because a UBS analyst reported on Monday many small businesses will fold during 2021 when the stimulus is removed. What the hell does that do to our unemployment and economic growth? Deloitte Access Economics said earlier this week that almost 10% of the nation's businesses were at, quote, high risk of failure come September. Now, governments have been long warned these would be the consequences. I'm not being wise after the event, but way back in April, I drew attention to the comments of Professor John Ioannidis, the Professor of Medicine and Professor of Epidemiology and Population Health at Stanford University School of Medicine. Would he know something? He made the point very early on, and I quote, if we'd not known about a new virus out there and had not checked individuals with PCR tests, the number of total deaths due to quote-unquote influenza-like illness would not have seemed unusual this year. At most, we might have casually noted that flu this season seems a bit worse than average. The media coverage, he wrote, would have been less than for an NBA game between the two most indifferent teams, unquote. Well, no one bothered to listen to him. They picked their own experts, advocating massive lockdowns and now this economic trillion-dollar mess. We've got 625,000 deaths from coronavirus around the world as at today. But the deaths so far this year from communicable diseases around the world are 7.2 million. The deaths from cancer are 4.5 million. The deaths caused by smoking are 2.7 million. We have, Australia, 172 people in hospital, 165 in Victoria. We've got 42 in intensive care, 40 of them are in Victoria. Is this a pandemic or an exercise in gross irresponsibility by the Victorian government? I said earlier this week, and I repeat it, why doesn't someone tell us whether the aim of the exercise is to reduce all risk to zero? So do we stop people from driving cars or motorcycles? Do we stop someone having a child or climbing a mountain or jumping off a cliff into the water? Everyone in a face mask, everyone to be tested, everyone to be frightened out of their wits? Scott Morrison says the Australian economy is fighting back. Well, I suppose he's got to accentuate the positives, but tell that to the tourism sector. They say unless they get extended JobKeeper for 6 months, tens of thousands of jobs are gone. Victoria are now costing the tourism industry $146 million a week. The sector has lost $6 billion in 3 months. The construction sector, the home always of productivity and jobs, is set to lose about 140,000 jobs over the next 2 years. The building labour force faces an 18% contraction. These are staggering figures. JobKeeper can't go on forever. What is at the end of the road? All the government estimates this week say that business will have a rapid bounce back. Well, I hope so. What do you think? I'll tell you what you'd be entitled to think. With militant protests on the street, monuments and statues being knocked down, freedom of speech being destroyed, people terrified to speak out, unhinged, snarling human pit bulls frightening the tripe out of people. Metaphor of all of this are the persistent attacks directed towards Donald Trump, a democratically elected president, and now a virus ripping the guts out of the economy. You'd be entitled to think there's an agenda out there, comprehensively determined to destroy Western society as we know it. Every day brings further drama in Victoria. From midnight tonight, as you know, a quarter of the nation's economy will be shut down, allegedly to halt the spread of coronavirus. 1 million workers to be kept at home at least until the end of September. We're in August. Most retail, manufacturing and administration businesses will close. 250,000 workers will be stood down. Companies will fail. And paradoxically, the sectors where there have been coronavirus clusters will continue to operate: health, aged care and takeaway food. A pandemic? Well, I can only go by the World Health statistics. 99% of the 7,800 active cases in Australia are mild. 47 are serious in a population of 25 million. 38 of the 47 are in Victoria. I thought a pandemic was a disease which was prevalent over a whole country or the world. There's nothing in the ACT. 3 people sick in the Northern Territory, 7 in Queensland, nothing in South Australia, nothing in Tasmania. New South Wales has 6 serious cases, but Victoria, with 25% of the population, has 63% of Australia's deaths, 67% of total infections, and 89% of current active cases. I think that spells 4 words, doesn't it? Catastrophic state government failure. So think about it. 1 million workers to stay at home, at least until the end of September. 250,000 workers stood down. It borders on the criminal. And then we're told Victorian health officials stopped using the Coronavirus Safe app designed to find close contacts of infectious cases. The Federal Department of Health Secretary, Professor Brendan Murphy, told a Senate inquiry yesterday that Victoria's Public Health Unit ceased using the app because they were under pressure and they didn't find any value in it. They've since committed to using it after it was found to be successful in New South Wales. Stop shaking your heads. Then yesterday, Victoria's Health Minister refused to answer a single question about her handling of coronavirus in a rare sitting of the Victorian Parliament. She didn't answer because she didn't know the answers. The bureaucrats were working overnight to provide written answers by today. So all that stuff on bungled hotel quarantine, failure to use the app, justification for the lockdown measures, she didn't have a clue. Under Victoria's Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities, those who've been tested positive were being allowed to leave their homes. Well, they plugged that loophole yesterday. And they did have time to announce fines of $4,957. Where the hell you get that figure from, I don't know, for some poor coot in breach. We have never seen this incompetence in the history of Australian government. And by the way, you know that inquiry into the hotel quarantine fiasco before a former judge, which could only be a total embarrassment for the Andrews government, it is going to be delayed. Why? Well, because they've declared a state of disaster, which prompts a simple question. Was that declaration a political decision or a health decision? To protect him or to protect us? Understandably, senior Australian business leaders are now starting to speak out. I'll talk to one later in the program. But as Adam Crichton said to me last night, we put a man on the moon half a century ago, and this is the best we can do to protect the elderly and the vulnerable without smashing the economy. Well, let me make a couple of further points. Donald Trump will be pilloried for opposing growing pressure to lockdowns and to lock down the US economy, allegedly combat the surging coronavirus. He said such a move would cause more harm than good, and he has cited countries like Australia, which have implemented lockdowns but had not prevented the virus from spreading. I should point out we can do without lectures about New Zealand. They had draconian lockdowns and their biggest industry, tourism, has been ruined. But two responses dominate discussion. Bear with me. Masks and lockdowns. The New England Journal of Medicine, in research looking at how effective masks might be, observed on May 21, and I quote, "We know that wearing a mask outside healthcare facilities offers little, if any, protection from infection. The chance of catching COVID-19 from a passing interaction in a public space is minimal." This is the New England Journal of Medicine, which publishes medical research and is published by the Massachusetts Medical Society. It's regarded as a prestigious, peer-reviewed medical journal, one of the oldest. I quote again, "We know that wearing a mask outside healthcare facilities offers little, if any, protection from infection. The chance of catching COVID-19 from a passing interaction in a public space is therefore minimal." These experts, in our alarmism, have been ignored. That's masks. What about lockdowns? The Lancet Medical Journal is an independent international medical journal dating back to 1823. It's regarded as a world leader in the publication of papers that have made a crucial contribution to science and human health. In a recent publication, the Lancet argued, and I quote, "In our analysis, full lockdowns and widespread COVID-19 testing were not associated with reductions in the number of critical cases or overall mortality." I repeat, this is the Lancet. "In our analysis, full lockdowns and widespread COVID-19 testing were not associated with reductions in the number of critical cases or overall mortality." So where does this leave us? I'd suggest fighting a virus with the wrong response, listening to the wrong experts, and trashing everything in our wake. It might even be that every case of COVID-19 in Victoria in recent weeks could be sourced to the hotel quarantine program. So what do we get? A cost to the national economy of at least $12 billion, 400,000 jobs gone, businesses who'll never again be able to return to business, and curfews, as I mentioned, the outstanding editorial in The Spectator, which made the point that bears repeating, curfews are tools of political repression, of martial law, of military occupation. They're not part of living in a thriving parliamentary democracy. Well, let's hear from the wonderful mind of Adam Crichton. Adam, if you have 1 in 3 Australian adults or 6.3 million people, and that was just by May 1 in 3 getting a special government handout, and half of all adult Tasmanians, for example, where the hell does this end?
Well, look, it's pretty grim statistics, Alan, and I think it's worth pointing out that it's actually worse than that. If you throw in the public servants across all 3 tiers of government, more than 52% of the entire workforce are actually, in some sense, dependent on a government handout now, whether it's a salary or a social security benefit. That's just extraordinary. I mean, more than half the workforce. In terms of where it ends, look, it's going to get worse. I think we're in kind of a phony recession now, if you like. You know, they talked about the phony war at the start of the Second World War where not much was happening. It's much the same now because of all this huge influx of debt from the federal government. Well, the huge influx of income. It was $30 billion in July, $23 billion this month. But that's going to fall away. It's going to fall to 14 in November and then 7 in January and then basically nothing in March and April. And when that happens, when the tide comes out, you're going to see so many millions more people unemployed, officially unemployed, when JobKeeper ends. And I think that's when the real recession is going to start. And I think it's when people are going to ask serious questions about whether the right strategy has been pursued by our state governments, especially in Victoria.
Adam, Matthias Cormann says the government is not an ATM. How many people are fooled by that? What?
Well, certainly it's acting like an ATM at the moment, and in its defence, that's what governments are doing all around the world. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing to do in the long run, but look, interest rates are low, so it can service the debt, but look, it just can't keep doing this forever, and to the government's credit, it has said this. These programs have to end. I mean, JobKeeper has to end. We can't keep borrowing from foreigners, which is effectively what's happening, to pay people to do little or nothing indefinitely. That's just not going to work. And all these people going around saying we can print money is just complete madness.
Well, I mean, you know, all our freedoms are being taken away. We're under martial law in Victoria. You've written today about political philosophy. Where do Liberal governments fit in to the total withdrawal of personal freedoms, curfews, border closures, telling people how to live, who you can meet, where you can meet, where you can eat, where you can shop, which businesses can operate, under which conditions? Who is defending the philosophy of personal freedoms?
Well, look, very few people right now, and I just don't know how with a straight face Liberal Party politicians after this can say that they respect, the sanctity of the individual and rule of law and so forth, and a low deficit, low debt. I mean, we've just had the biggest increase in debt and deficit in peacetime by a Liberal government. We've had extraordinary draconian incursions on our civil liberties, without, I might add, any scientific justification, really, or indeed any cost-benefit analysis whatsoever. No. Nothing's been presented to the people, and yet it's just happened. In Victoria, of course, they've declared a state of disaster, which effectively suspends all laws and gives all the powers to the Premier and the Police Minister for a disease which has a 99.5% survival rate. I mean, it really is hard to even say that it's happening, but it's happened.
I mean, you and I said from the outset, and I was saying before I came here onto this program, it's pretty simple. You had to protect the vulnerable. Indeed, the Prime Minister himself said this on March 15, protect the vulnerable, quarantine the sick, but don't lock down everything else. Lock down the aged care homes, of course. Let the rest of the people get on with their lives. But we've now got a private sector recession and a Liberal government providing over economic collapse.
Extraordinary. And look, I firmly believe in 12 months' time these lockdowns will be seen as very bad policy. We've just seen this evening an outbreak in New Zealand. Extraordinary. This has been held out as the paragon of the correct response, and yet we've got more cases of transmission, and I understand the Prime Minister there has just ordered another lockdown, which is just extraordinary punishment on the people of New Zealand, and clearly demonstrates the arrogance of this view that governments by fiat, like King Canute can just order viruses to go away. Is just extraordinary. We have to live with this, and we have to be practical.
Adam, George Orwell once said, no one ever seizes power with the intention of relinquishing it. No politician today seems of the mind to let individuals determine their own destiny.
No, look, it's certainly, sadly, the case that a lot of this extra surveillance that we've had to put up with from this virus is going to be around for a very, very long time. I mean, look back at the First World War. Before then, people could move among countries kind of with relative freedom, and then passports came in because governments wanted more control, and look, over 100 years later, we have a lot more than passports now. It's bigger and bigger government all the time, and I do worry about that because, as you say, bureaucracy does not like giving up power. There's extraordinary path dependence here, and we've basically all just copied what China's done.
Absolutely.
That's essentially what's happened.
Brilliant stuff. Adam, let me just bring in here Adrian Lyons, who is a guest of mine here now. I spoke to him last night about this inland rail. The route is wrong. And if it proceeds as it is, 117 farms from Narromine to Narrabri will be carved up, and no one seems to care in Canberra. One-sided consultation, no business case, no talk of proper compensation. But if they used the old line and modernised it, it would go to Coonamble, problem solved. Now, I'm going to come back to that in a later program, but Adam, I'm swamped with correspondence on this border closure stuff. A farmer rang me today. He's got a farm in Mergen and a farm at Bingara. Mergen is 270 kilometres northwest of Brisbane. Bingara is in the New England region on the Guida River. But with the new border restrictions, you can't go from one farm to another. And he says, well, the drenching, feeding and general care of the animals is at risk. Springtime's near. Flies and worms get active. Sheep need essential care. And if they don't get it, they die. A painful death caused by being fly-blown and worm-burdened. And farmers need to be able to get to their farms. So declaring all of New South Wales a hotspot indicates that those running government know nothing about farming or business. Now, Adrian Lyons last night, after joining me on the program, highlighted a similar problem. There are contract harvesters. And they start in Queensland. They pay $700,000 to $800,000 for a harvester. They start in Queensland and they follow south with their headers. And Adrian's with me. Adrian, just take this up again. Just explain to me the problems that exist.
Well, the problems we have is we're short-staffed as it is. We've got to man our properties. We've got to man these grain corp sites and all sites that receive grain. But we have this flow of traffic that's been going on for 50 years, where they start up in Queensland and the Victorian headers come up to Queensland. They work all through Queensland, down through New South Wales. They bring all their staff. And here we have these restrictions on the borders between New South Wales and Victoria. How do you get across these borders? How do we deliver grain from, say, North Star to Gundawindi? They've got to have...
These people are harvesting food for a table.
Yeah, paddock to plate.
I mean, shouldn't this be an essential service?
This is exactly what we've got to talk about. We've got time to work this out. We really have to work out how we cross these borders, how we get these staff, how do we work with the government to be able to have proper measures in place, and we are short-staffed everywhere.
But see, these poor coots have had rain. They've been begging for rain. They've had rain. So the wheat harvest, the chickpeas, the grain could be the biggest since 2016, and you can't get seasonal workers.
No, not at all.
and that's due to COVID. Of course, the backpackers, they're not allowed in and so on. And the farmers pleading for workers, and this is lovely, what the government sends you workers, oh yes, we can give you workers, hairdressers and baristas.
Well, it's such a great idea, but I don't think I want an $850,000 header, no disrespect, written by a coffee maker or they can make us coffee in the paddock, that'd be great.
Yes.
But we can't have someone applying their skills on this header.
Adam, let's bring Adam Crichton and his magnificent... Adam, how could this be? I've mentioned in the recent Lancet Medical Journal, it argued, and I quote, in our analysis, full lockdowns and widespread COVID-19 testing were not associated with reductions in the number of critical cases or overall mortality. I mean... Adam,
isn't that just extraordinary? Because frankly, even if they were associated, then it still wouldn't be an ironclad case because of all the extraordinary costs of the lockdown. So even putting the cost to one side, they still can't find a relationship after 6 months. I mean, really, this just surely highlights the folly of this move. And as I said earlier, in 12 months' time, you know, when there's royal commissions into this, when there's inquiries all around the world, the conclusion will certainly be you do not put your entire population under house arrest for months.
But Adrian, you've got this bloke McCormack, leader of the National Party. No one even knows him. He knows nothing. He won't meet you because he's got no answers. He hasn't got the bureaucrats with him. I mean, the bloke is absolutely hopeless, and this is his constituency.
Well, the thing is that you said it there earlier. They talk in platitudes. They're not serious about what we offer as a New South Wales Farmers and Country Women's Association. We bring things to the table. We've got a lot of experience with our policy advisors and farmers who live and breathe this. We want to be able to support this. We offer information. We've got to get listened to. That's all there is to it.
Good on you. Well, hang in there. I'll be speaking to someone off air. Adam, just a final word to you. I mean, where is this going to end up, Adam Crichton?
Where's it going to end up? Well, that's the question. Look, I think it's going to see governments eventually back away from their lockdowns because, as we're seeing around the world, these breakouts still happen after the lockdowns. We're seeing it in France, we're seeing it in Spain. So they're going to have to tell their people, look, you know, we were wrong.
We were wrong.
And we're going to have to live with this.
Absolutely. Great stuff, Adam. Good to talk to you. Talk to you next week, Adam Crichton. Adrian, thank you for your time.